encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. If you want to be a serious Bible student, a successful servant, and a powerful preacher, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome to Preachers in Training. My name is Robert Hatfield, and this is the podcast on which we discuss all things preaching and ministry. As we begin season 15, season 15 of this podcast, we're discussing today cultivating an evangelistic atmosphere in a congregation. Here to help us discuss this subject today, Brother Neal Pollard, who serves as one of the preachers for the Lehman Avenue congregation in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And Brother, I know this isn't your first time here, and I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with you and your work. Welcome back, and it's such a pleasure to talk with you today.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
I know that most recently, and this has been on many people's hearts and minds, the tornadoes that swept through, of course, we all think of Mayfield, Kentucky, but Bowling Green was not spared either from that, surrounding areas. How's everybody there doing, and what's the update on the ground these days?
Well, everybody's doing well. We lost 17 people in the tornado here, 12 very close proximity to where actually Hiram and his family live.
Mm-hmm.
It came very close to the church building here, within a quarter mile to our south and about half a mile to our west and north. So we were very blessed to have missed we didn't have any damage. So
wow,
it put us in a place in the center of what's not, even though it's 100,000 people, it's not a geographically a large area. And so immediately from day one, we started hitting the ground and trying to assess and figure out how we could help the community.
Wow.
So we're in a lot better place now, but there's still, you can tell in any of the affected areas, there's a long way to go, especially with supply chain issues and already things that were in place before the tornado.
Yeah. I know that on the front page of the church website, which is lehmancoc.org, LEHMANCOC.org. I have the link in our show notes. You all have featured there at the top disaster relief, supplies and things for the community and other things. If people are still wanting to help congregations, can they contact you guys about that, or is there specific needs you all have today?
They can. Our brotherhood is so generous, and we've been overwhelmed by the generosity. We don't need supplies. We have UPS tractor trailer loads of things that we still have that we're distributing. Dry goods, not perishable items, and we have all kind of variety of ways to help people in the community and in churches in the area.
Sure. Okay. Wonderful. And I'm seeing on the front page of the website there, if you click the button about learning more, there's an area down there to discuss those wishing to donate and things like that, which is great as well.
That's it. There
okay.
It is.
Wonderful. Well, today we're discussing cultivating an evangelistic atmosphere in a congregation. And I thought of you because I know that has been a passion of yours. Certainly as Christians, we all know the Great Commission, and evangelism is very much a passion for all of us. I remember the Think Souls emphasis back in Colorado, and it seemed to me that you were very much a part of that back at that time. And now I'm seeing more emphasis. And of course, I heard through Hiram about the great things there at Lehman. And again, the emphasis on evangelism. You want to, just by introduction, maybe talk a little bit about either or both of those initiatives back in Colorado and then there in Kentucky now, and sort of, I think this may be a softball question, but the motivation behind making that an emphasis in your ministry there and helping the congregation to emphasize evangelism as well.
Sure. If I could do it as kind of an evolution, I think what hopefully happens with all of us is that we're growing in our ministry and in our individual lives. So you think about a preacher, we're supposed to be growing as Christians individually, and we also are going to grow in experience in ministry. I went to Faulkner University when Wendell Winkler was there, and he always was preaching about balance. The preacher's supposed to be involved in the 3 E's: evangelism, edification, and enlistment. That is, trying to help train other men to preach.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an emphasis in our classroom. He didn't really discuss methods. A lot of good practical, a lot of reliance on biblical teaching and how that's going to help accomplish that goal. My first work, I was 22. I went to Livingston, Alabama. I dabbled in the Jewel Miller. They were VHS tapes at that time.
Oh, nice.
And taking it into people's homes and trying to study that way, sitting down and trying to do one shot. I really didn't know what I was doing. We moved to Mechanicsville, Virginia in 1994, and that was a very seminal moment for me. I was 24, first time working with elders, and the other minister, I don't know if you remembered him or not, Robert. His name was Bill Snell, tall fella.
Oh, yes.
From the early days of PTP.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't he trained he didn't formally train in preaching, but he was very zealous about evangelism and preferred the OBS method. And that really whet my appetite. And seeing a congregation, Cold Harbor Road, that had so many people that were trained and who were enthusiastic about evangelism. The early 90s into the late 90s into 2000s, we were a little different culturally. That's an evolution that's occurred as well. Sitting down and having all those study opportunities really builds excitement when you see people sitting across the desk from you. Remember a fellow that's a gospel preacher today who sat down and was an atheist at the time that he studied with Bill and I. Seeing that moment when he obeys the gospel. All of these are developmental, and I know we'll talk more about that. But before I ever got to Colorado, a foundation was being built for me by other people. Of course, it started with my dad at home. I grew up a preacher's kid, and he was very evangelistic. So many different impressions were made, and I think in a lot of our lives as preachers, to help us to refine our understanding and to build our experience of what works and doesn't work.
Do you think that sometimes, maybe at least in our public conversations about evangelism, maybe we overcomplicate it a little? I know that it's a really important. I mean, it's vitally important, and we don't want to mess it up. And so I guess that's the reason why. But I found myself early in my ministry, and I'm very much still evolving. Maybe almost overthinking or worrying myself to inactivity. Sometimes I'm ashamed to say. And now looking back, I realize that's what I was doing. Sometimes it was because I didn't have a good plan in place. Other times I just wasn't really mature enough to recognize an opportunity when it was right there in front of me. But to the point that you just made, it just made me think, it's better just to try and keep trying. And I mean, you're not going to do bad. You're just going to refine it and learn how to better work with people, in part because you're doing it more, and maybe on the other hand, because you're experiencing different kinds of people who come from different types of backgrounds, and that's all helpful in the overall mission. Do you think that's a fair analysis?
I do. When I lived in Colorado, I don't know how I met him, but there was a man who had moved from California to New Mexico, Belen, New Mexico, a power company lineman named Hud Griffith. And I was teaching an evangelism class. We were kind of kicking off the Think Souls. And I knew he was always in a Bible study. And so I called him and I said, look, I'm fixing to go to class tonight. I want to quote you. Can you tell me how it is that you're so successful in getting a Bible study up? And he goes, all right, you might want to write this down. So I got ready, He goes, I go up to a person and I ask them, would you like to be in a Bible study? That was it.
Wow.
And let me tell you, that has filled my mind on several occasions since then. And I think I told you earlier this week, right now I'm in 3 Bible studies. And Kathy and I just finished studying with a couple last month that obeyed the gospel. And we'll talk about the big part so many other people played in that. We just actually sat down and did the study. And it was a matter in all of those cases of me going up. And sometimes you have to work up the courage. That's the complicated part, is I'm afraid of what reaction I'm going to get. I'm amazed, continue to be amazed at how often people will say yes.
Yeah.
Simply.
as preachers, the biblical term, one of the biblical terms is evangelist. And so, obviously, there's a lot to that term, but at its very core, we're spreading the good news. And as a part of that, certainly we're studying the Bible with those who are not yet Christians. I suppose Christian preachers ought to be leading the way in terms of our congregations, and maybe setting the tone in a lot of ways, being an example of soul winning. At the same time, I know some preachers who might respond and say, yeah, but we can't do it all. I can't be the only person. And 3 Bible studies going on at the same time, that'll fill up the available weeknights, or whenever you're able to do those, in addition to Wednesday night Bible class and Sunday morning and Sunday night, and then whatever else is going on in the life of the congregation. You want to talk a little bit about why it's important to have other people involved and on board, and the likelihood in a congregation of just about any size, there are soul-minded people who are very much focused on those things in the
That's right.
pews, and maybe even more than what we realize.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
There's so much to be able to say in response to that. I think of, first of all, what we emphasize, both leadership and from the pulpit, is what a congregation internalizes, and we can come back to that later. I do believe that training takes time. We've got to be patient, because evangelism is about building a culture, because every church culture is built upon some emphasis. And what I believe very strongly ought to be the cultural emphasis in every congregation to be New Testament is at least a very central focus on evangelism, and a more outreach oriented. So because too often it's so easy for us to get to be self-centered and internalized in our view. And so you don't change that. Brother Winkler used to say it took them 25 years to get wherever they are. You don't change that overnight. And so you've got to be patient as a preacher to help people to get to that better place, that more congregational level emphasis. And I've only been here a little over 2 years, so we're still putting the scaffolding up, and we're still building that.
That's a matter of intentionality, though, you're saying, on your part in the pulpit. How do you do that practically without sounding like a broken record, or driving something into the ground, or somebody saying, oh, there he goes again? And a lot of people view preachers as though they're coming in with some kind of hobby horse, or that's his pet project or whatever. Again, it's kind of hard to argue with evangelism, but of all the things that, I don't want people rolling their eyes when I go to talk about that.
No, that's true. Obviously, you can't preach every sermon or orient every Bible class to that, but it's amazing how seamlessly so many things lend themselves to inviting into that the evangelism perspective. When we talk about the church calendar, how do you look at that? How do you look at those events? So that's not just what's happening in the pulpit. We have preacher elder meetings every Wednesday. There's a place where we can have those conversations. We can talk about this, vision groups, and there's 7 vision groups, and there's a local outreach vision group, but the entire vision statement that we drafted is evangelistic in its nature. And so there's the one-off conversations that you're having with people that you're trying to develop in the congregation, with deacons and with guys who are in the vision groups, and people of interest in your lives in the congregation, where you're planting those seeds and you're bringing them along. And I do think a church is going to inevitably have some kind of overarching message that they're sharing of what's important to them. And I would say, without it being, like you say, every sermon, every Sunday, but so frequently a part of you, so much a part of you, that you can bring people to that without it being a dead horse.
Yeah. What are we known? And yeah, to your point, if we're not intentional about that, then it'll be something else.
Yeah, we won't like it.
Positive or negative. Yeah, that's right. Mostly negative, I'm sure. Yeah, the terminology I'm hearing you use, you're talking about culture within a congregation. vision statements. I mean, this is common terminology that I read in leadership books, maybe in the sometimes in the business realm, or at least they're sort of aimed in that direction. That kind of terminology excites me very much, because these seem to be proven pathways of very effective leaders, whether you're talking about the leadership experts like the John Maxwell's or others, or whether you're talking about people who have taken that expertise and applied it in a specific discipline or business or whatever the application is. Um, Obviously, you believe that there is to some degree a place for that, or utilizing some of that wisdom in the local congregation. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Now, we first went through that at Bear Valley, and walking through the guys that facilitated that process. One was a current CEO of a Fortune 500 company.
Wow.
And another guy was a guy that we had actually baptized early on was the retiring CEO of Western Union. And so you had some guys who knew how those principles worked in the business world. I walked through that as a participant as we built our vision statement at Bear Valley in the last several years, where we kind of got to a praise, participate, proclaim, three planks kind of an approach to from Acts 2:42 through 47 as to what we need to be. Here, the process worked differently. It was the first time I'd ever facilitated in a congregation where I was through a strategic plan and going through leadership planning. And we did it during COVID when we weren't able to meet as much. And so we started meeting outside at one of our elders' house, the house of one of our elders, and kind of set the groundwork for that. And then we began meeting together once a week, once every other week, to kind of walk through. I won't go through all the details, but through like a SWOT analysis, building the bridge. Kind of way we put it was building the bridge from now to then. How do we want to get from here to there? And for us, one of the exercises we did was we said, what is the community's picture for what are we known in this community? To tell me how the community sees the Lehman Avenue Church of Christ. And one of the elders said, we're kind of like the big box store. I mean, they know that we're here, but they have no idea who we are and what we're about. So that's a good starting place for the now that will help you get to the then. And it's an ironic thing in that now, a little over 15, 16 months ago, that we said we wanted to be visible to our community. And we started making concrete plans to that end. And as a result of that, opportunities began to open up. We were laid in our lap. And this won't reach everybody in the community, but NBC came to us with a time slot that was prime during COVID, when people are sitting at home on Sunday morning, for us to have a TV program.
Wow.
We talked about who we wanted to be as a congregation. The last two ministerial hires was our men that help us to reach into all of our community. And then the tornado happens, which certainly God did not do or bring, but through which we've been able to, we're not invisible to this community anymore. And open doors like that help us. So my point in all that is we started planning to this end. And as the result, and I found this in my entire preaching life, when you make concrete plans, you might be pushing on one door and it might not open, but God opens up other doors. And that is especially true in evangelism.
And if nothing else, it makes you more aware when something does arise that is a part of your goal. It's sort of like when you're shopping for a vehicle and you identify the one you want, and suddenly that's all you ever see on the road.
Right.
And once you've identified your goal, if you want to say a destination, though I think we understand we're not saying that's the be all end all, but like you said, there's a destination out there. There's a place that we want to get, and then we're going to try and build the road that connects where we are now to where we want to be. And suddenly I'm sure you begin to notice the opportunities that are around you that may or may not have been there all along. To your point, God in his providence may be opening these unique doors now that you've caught up to this vision and began to pray over it and all of that, which is no doubt vital as well.
That's right.
I really like this kind of terminology. I know that there may be some guys that would say, well, is all this really all that vital? Do you have you had to, or what would you say to the person who has to sort of sell these kinds of meetings? But we need to have meetings about vision or drafting vision statements, and there is good wisdom that the church can utilize in doing this. To your point, it's not just a business approach, because as you said, what was it, the Bear Valley, you took from Acts chapter 2 and used that
Mhm.
to actually draft that vision statement.
Right.
Any words of advice or an exhortation to somebody who may be minded that way, or to a preacher who is experiencing men who may be minded that way?
Well, sure. I mean, I think it can happen very simply. If you have the ability to have a place and a voice in a leadership meeting,
Mhm.
like with elders, to be able to go in and say, hey, oh, and not adversarially, not
Right.
confrontationally, but in a sense of team building. So, all right, what's our plan for the future? Where do we want to be? Where do we
Mhm.
want to be in 5 years? What do we want to accomplish? And you can start that in a way like that that allows you then to listen to what they have to say. And so maybe it's just a matter of they have some goals, but they don't really know how to get there. And
Mhm.
so that would be my next part of the process is say, okay, so what do we want to do to accomplish those? Because typically, I've not seen it otherwise. Men who are in that position are good, godly men, and they want the church to grow. They want
Mhm.
to utilize members to facilitate that growth. They want to reach out in the community. And as you said, I think at the very beginning, sometimes we just don't know, and we need some guidance on that. Or we'll come in and we'll pound the pulpit and berate them and not give them. We'll say, "Man, you need to be evangelistic," and
Yeah.
we don't really define what that means, and we don't give people the equipment, the training they need in order to do that. So
Mhm.
it has worked for me, in Virginia and Colorado and here to just come in and say, tell me where you want to go. A lot of that happens in the like when I sat down with the Lehman Avenue elders, they said, first words out of their mouth to me, "Are you ready for a challenge?" And then they painted for me, we want to reach Bowling Green, Warren County. They were known for
Mm.
doing a work of Evangelize Kentucky, trying to establish a congregation in every county in Kentucky. It's a lofty, it's a wonderful, worthy goal. But they said, it felt like we were sending our money other places. But what were
Mm.
we doing? Just in a point of contrast, in this tornado relief last month, over 200 of our members, from little ones all the way up to the elderly, had their feet on the ground, either in neighborhoods cutting trees and clearing debris, or helping to bring in and move out supplies.
Mm.
That's well beyond the 20% percentage that we often hear,
Yeah.
and that lets the elders know that that's what's in the heart of folks. That's the potential that we have.
Yeah. So when it does come time to practically demonstrate to people, what is evangelism? Let's say that you've drafted vision statements. The leadership team is on board between elderships and ministers, or whomever needs to be involved in that. Obviously, you're preaching sermons about it, which I like to think is in every preacher's regular rotation anyway. What do we need to have? Classes on, maybe practical tips for conducting Bible studies, or where do you go from there? And it seems the tornado relief has opened up some service components, which no doubt are
Unique,
evangelistic in
though.
nature. Yeah, unique, no doubt. How are you getting the transition from maybe more of the philosophy, even the doctrine, to the boots on the ground, and here's how it's done kind of approaches?
Well, I think there has to be a macro approach and a micro approach.
Mhm.
Right. So the macro approach is going to be, we've already talked about the sermons, and working it into your preaching. Um, in in the Bible classroom, we have done, and I think there's a periodic need for that, an evangelism 101
Mm.
and an evangelism 102. 101 is establishing the case, maybe introducing some methods, and I don't really ascribe to a single method.
Mhm.
In fact, I'm using a brand new method in a couple of studies I've never used before. with the couple that I mentioned earlier. We went through the OBS, and I used Searching for Truth about a year ago in a study with a couple. So I introduced those methods. In the 102 class is where you can kind of sit down and have role play, and you present those, because what we're afraid of somebody getting us over a barrel, or giving us that dilemma that we can't resolve. And we walk through how to do that. And there's nothing, it's maybe embarrassing to do it in front of a classroom, but you kind of make it lighthearted and enjoyable.
Yeah.
But it gives them exposure, and they'll say, man, I didn't fall apart. I didn't melt into the floor. That's not all that bad. So I think that happens. The micro approach is where you enlist other people to do those studies alongside of you. So let me, a couple that we studied with that came here from the island of Dominica. It was COVID was kind of had them hesitant. They have a special needs child, so we did it on Zoom. Never done a Bible study totally on Zoom.
Yeah.
And I involved one of our elders and one of our deacons. And so we're all in on that Zoom call. And when they obey the gospel, I have the philosophy, if you want to, I'm a believer in Bible camp. You want to get somebody engaged in Bible camp, all you got to do is get them to camp once. You want to get people involved and interested in missions, get them on a mission trip. You'll never have to say another word to them. The same is true with evangelism. When somebody sees that moment, when somebody obeys the gospel, you never have to. With Greg and Russell, I don't have to say, hey, do you believe in evangelism? They believe in it. Yeah. Another thing that helps in that micro approach is something Chuck Anderson, a guy in Michigan, member of the church, wrote a book called Bring, Teach, Keep. And his theory is that every congregation has bringers, has teachers, and has keepers. There are some folks that know how to get people involved in Bible studies, and to get them to church, to get them to say yes. And then there's some that are equipped and know how to teach. They have the gift of teaching. And there are some who are really good at making people feel part of the family. And so that being the case, you figure out who those folks are, and then you start tapping those folks one-on-one and utilizing their strengths. So the bringers, you figure out who they are. And I'm already seeing who some of our bringers are, and I'm trying to get those folks to understand that they're being involved in the evangelism process by getting people to come to church, by getting people to come to church functions. I think about a couple, Dan and Vivian. They're great at that. I think of Josh Adkins. And then there's guys like Josh who I'm having to sit down in studies with me to learn how to do that. And that's done one-on-one. You have people of different ages who have different personalities, and you see how they fit in. And so we have Braden and Michelle who were responsible for getting this couple to come to church. Now that they're here, they have a good relationship with them. Bring them into your home and make them feel part of the family. Do a follow-up study with them. That happens slowly, bit by bit, but that's how you build a culture. It's not some seismic, huge event. Would love to have a Pentecost where this all happens all at once, but it doesn't. It happens. It happens one-on-one, one person at a time, getting them on board. And of course, for us, another uniqueness is Hiram is here now, and Hiram is extremely evangelistic, and we kind of learn from each other. I have a lot to learn from Hiram. He's incredible. He's in the sports world. They call him a 5-tool player.
Yeah, that's right. Hiram's pretty great, and our TLN listeners can catch Hiram on God Magnified every Monday from TheLightNetwork.tv. So there's Hiram and Forrest free plug for the day. There you go.
Happy to do
that. Is that something? This idea of being, patient, one at a time, is that something that you're communicating regularly to the congregation as well? I mean, the idea of planting and watering and allowing the nurturing the seed and all of that. I mean, it would seem to me maybe that needs to be said out loud fairly frequently, just to remind people this isn't a Pentecost thing. And so many of us do. I mean, I think you were saying a minute ago, early on, you were expecting these one and done kind of approaches, and I hear Christians say, well, it worked at Pentecost. Peter preached one sermon and all those people, but different circumstances, and that's just not the way it works most of the time these days, right?
Right, and we're closer to Mars Hill than Jerusalem, so it's,
Okay. Yes.
that, and even this is my first time in the Bible Belt, but I found it's true even here, that
Yes.
you just got to dial in your expectations to where we are culturally. But I do believe that we're not even, if we're not throwing seed, then there's no planting and watering going on. And I don't
Yes.
see anywhere. And look, I was in Denver, where your neighbor might be Muslim, might be Hindu, might
Mm-hmm.
be nothing at all, New Age, and there was a much more of a spirituality than a religious environment. But
Yeah.
there, and then I was in the DC corridor in the Richmond area. It doesn't matter where you are. There are a lot of people out there who are searching for purpose, and I do believe COVID has given us, generally speaking, an open door we didn't have before that.
Mm-hmm. And one, by the way, that we ought to steward very carefully, even the way that we speak about all the things that are going on these days. We want to leave as many doors open as possible. Okay, yeah, that's good. So we've got the macro approach and the micro approach, and that is more of a one-on-one. We're getting into the trenches together, discovering the talents of those with whom we worship and are privileged to serve the Lord with, and going from there, helping each person feel valuable, as though they can contribute. And there is something in the work of evangelism that everyone can do.
That's
And
right.
then it sounds like maybe stretching a little bit too. I mean, yes, you have the people that are the bringers, and you have, through those three different categories that you mentioned, but it could be that you can be a bringer and something else as well, a teacher and all of that. So to help in that way. Is that sort of the strategy? Once you get the leadership and the mentality, the vision and all of that down, we're going in those directions, and then we're just going to let the gospel do its work. And that in and of itself is contagious, you said, just like a mission trip or something like that, in getting people on board, so to speak, with this process of evangelism. Is that a good summary of where we've been so far?
I think that's right. I think what happens, and it doesn't take a lot of this for it to happen, is seeing success.
Mm-hmm.
If you've been in a congregation where for 5 or 6 or 10 years, just about all your baptisms are kids in your congregation, which is wonderful. It's
Yeah.
important,
Mm-hmm.
but that's you couldn't say that the kingdom itself is really being greatly shaken and moved by that. And
Mm-hmm.
then you start having people from the community, and they see the process in play. Where I'll go back to Jason for just a moment. He'd been playing basketball for a couple of years, and so I can go back to 5 or 6 guys and say, you were a part of this. You're living a Christian example in front of them. And then,
Mm-hmm.
Braden was the one that said, come to church, come to church. And it wasn't the first time, but after, ultimately he's like, we don't really have a church home. We'll do it. And then once he's in the door, and then you begin to hear, and then people are coming up to them and being friendly. See, that's a big part of evangelism, is
Yeah.
you don't stay in your own little conversations after church.
Right.
Your first focus is on the people that you don't know in the building. And that's part of that culture shift. I can't remember how exactly it was said, but in Colorado, that was something that was said, is that you don't change the culture. You help people to see that the culture that they have is undesirable, and then you show them another culture that's more desirable, and that's
Mm.
when they'll change.
Mm-hmm.
And when does that happen? Again, that's not a seismic, one big cataclysmic thing that happens. It is those little successes that begin. You're pushing the boulder up the hill, and you're trying to get up to
Mm-hmm.
that apex to where it starts getting some momentum of its own.
As a preacher, it's important to remain patient during all that process, right? I mean, as you say, it does take a long, like Brother Winkler's point, 25 years to learn it. It's going to take a while to unlearn it
That's
or to
right.
learn something else. Yeah.
Yeah, and patience means it's not a step forward every time. It's like in any other goals that we have. You
Mm-hmm.
can anticipate that you're going to take some steps backward. You're going to try to study with people. I'm been in a study for a while with a guy. I don't have high hopes that I'm going to convert him. The challenges that we brought into the study were too much. It's more of a counseling than it is a Bible study, but I'm benefiting from that. I feel like if we can sell the congregation, and and understand ourselves that every attempt that we make to obey the Great Commission
Mm-hmm.
is not going to come up empty. You know,
Mm.
Isaiah 55:10 and 11 to some degree comes to play there. That whenever we, and it's the law of planting and sowing and reaping. That in Virginia we had a campaign for Christ. It was it's a cold contact campaign where you go
Mm-hmm.
out and you knock doors all throughout the community, and our goal was to hit every town, I mean every home in Mechanicsville. We did. We baptized 14 people. A
Mm.
year later, none were faithful.
Mm.
They weren't searching for us, but our members got out there, and we pushed on that door, and we pushed on that door, and we were involved. We put in some sweat equity into it, and it's amazing what happened over the next 5 to 7 years. How
Mm.
many community and what happened, we got that helped us get more comfortable in talking with coworkers, friends, and family members who we already had a relationship with. And as a result of that, God opened some doors that we weren't even pushing on because we
Mm-hmm.
put in the effort. And I have found that to be true throughout my preaching life. You may think that it's going to come from one direction, but you just leave that to God. He'll open those doors if you're making the effort to do that. And if you can remember that yourself as the preacher and then help others to understand that, it keeps them from being discouraged because, success comes at different rates in different places and different times.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a little bit ago utilizing television. I'm no doubt other forms of media, including social media. Of course, we're having this conversation over
Right.
a form of new media. Uh, what role does that play in the evangelism plan that you all have? No doubt it's important. It's something that you all are utilizing. Where does that fit into this whole matrix?
Well, we've been doing the TV program about a year. Starting we record at WVBS, and so Hiram and I just got back from there a couple of months ago, and
Mm.
so now, and the last day we figured out what we're going to do from now on is we do something very similar to this, where we sit and we discuss a Bible subject. So we did several lessons on the Book of Acts,
Oh,
and that has already resonated in our community. More than that more traditional. And when you think about TV, not to disparage it, we're
right,
we're doing it, but you're looking at people in a certain demographic when you do that,
right, right.
you know. And so, but the TV station is allowing us to create a YouTube, and through that and through World Video Bible School, airing it through
Mhm.
our YouTube page, and through that, we're getting other responses. We have some plans later in 2022 to work through like a World Bible School and through our website, which we just have kicked back off again. So it's still very rudimentary. We got a lot to do to it, but
Uh-huh.
that's going to be one of the things we do is just, we're going to hopefully drive people to see the TV program that way. NBC's fine with that. And so it gets to live with people in different demographics through
Great.
that.
Mhm.
But to me, through the years, we had a TV program in Virginia, had one in Colorado.
Mhm.
It has proven to be um, successful because people tune into that medium. And I just mean by that what we're doing right here.
Sure.
And we've learned from that. I've ditched the tie long ago and the coat, and tried to make it more of a Bible study approach than that talking head.
Yeah.
Uh, and you learn those kinds of things, and I think that helps. We're still early on. We'll see. We've gotten
Mhm.
a couple of folks. We had several folks to come visit. We had a couple of members of the church to place membership as a result of the TV program, and so the elders say, let's keep moving with it.
Yeah. That's neat. But eventually it sounds like and I appreciate your candor with all this too. I mean, this is a work in progress you're saying and this
Sure.
is some of this is new like the website and other things, which looks great by the way.
Well,
But the point there seems to be that eventually all of these things are going to reflect this goal of evangelism and making it as easy as possible to either get to know you all there locally or to maybe send a focus on to World Bible School or some form of Bible study in that way. Is that accurate in what you're saying?
it is. Here's how I
Yeah.
see it is we've got a rock that we're trying to push that's bigger than we can push it.
Hmm.
And obviously we're counting on God to give the power to make that happen. But
Yeah.
it also requires us with our hands on that, pushing. How much pushing does it take before you start to see that rock move? And to me, that rock is a lost world in need of the gospel, the Great Commission that we have. And the last thing we want to do is just give up and say we're not going to do anything at all. And so we look for strategies, we look for methods, we look for ways, we look for people, and I think it should be a constant part of our everyday work as preachers of the gospel to to get folks to stand next to us, pushing that rock with God.
Yeah. Mm. And finding the most effective ways and making sure that we're utilizing those ways and to really try and reach the community, I think is important. I'm just interjecting this on my own, but sometimes we're content with the idea of, well, our numbers are this and this, and really what we're doing is we're reaching other Christians, which is great. We need to encourage others, but that's not evangelism. That's
Right.
important. That's good work, but that's not evangelism. And so,
The
to make
kingdom
sure that
hasn't grown. It's the
right,
same size. It's just moved from one place to the other.
sure, yeah, yeah, and hey, it's all great, but yeah, we want to make sure we don't want to call that something that it's not at the same time. That's good. Well, let's see. Our time is quickly expiring. Maybe if there's anything else, I want to take a break and let people know and then get in touch with us. If there's something, brother, that maybe we need to briefly mention, or a word of encouragement or something like that you want to offer as we conclude and summarize today, we'll give that opportunity here in just a moment. I want to remind those of you who are listening or watching that Preachers in Training is a work of the Light Network, a network of podcasts designed to encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This podcast is one of the originals. That's why we're on season 15. And the Lord willing, in 2023, we're going to celebrate 10 years, which is just wild and crazy to me. We're so grateful for the blessings that God has given to us and for the fact that you're a part of this. And as you know, if you've been listening for a while, most of our podcasts are requests from you, and we love to hear from you. You can email me, preachers@thelightnetwork.tv, if you have questions, comments, future episode ideas. I'd love to hear it all. Another great resource and a wonderful place for you to get in touch with us here is in our Facebook group. On Facebook.com, search for Preachers in Training. It's a closed group, but if you're a listener of the podcast and you want to be a part of that, we'd love to invite you in. And we do try and keep our conversations focused on the subjects of preaching and ministry. If you enjoy Preachers in Training, don't forget to subscribe in your favorite podcast app or on YouTube if you prefer the visual version. And you can watch this conversation as well. Try and make that as visually pleasing as possible. But just search for Preachers in Training or The Light Network on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. And if you don't mind, if you enjoy the podcast, the audio version, give us a rating and a review in your podcast app of choice, Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any other app that supports ratings and reviews. That will not only benefit this podcast and encourage us, but also raise our viewership, the visual aspect of the podcast in search returns and things like that. And so if you want to help us spread the word with that, we would very much appreciate that. Brand new episodes of Preachers in Training release every Thursday from our website, thelightnetwork.tv, or our distributing partners, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and the like. We're talking today with Brother Neal Pollard in Bowling Green, Kentucky, about cultivating an evangelistic atmosphere in a congregation. I have really enjoyed our conversation today and appreciate, brother, your answering the questions and your candor and just opening up and saying, well, here's what we're trying and this is what we're attempting to do. And it's so encouraging to hear about and to see the results that are coming as well, that the Lord is blessing you all. Is there anything we need to say just in conclusion, maybe something we've overlooked or just a parting word of advice or encouragement as we land our plane today?
Well, let me share something with you. Wayne Berger told me several
Mhm.
years ago. I worked with him at Bear Valley. He said, always try to have at least one Bible study going at all times. For the
Mm.
preacher, I think that's a great challenge with which you can challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe to ask, how long has it been since I've been in a study? And try to keep yourself in the practice of that. No matter how long you do it, you're always nervous when you're going up to that person and saying, hey, would you like to sit down and study the Bible with me? But you
Mhm.
always benefit from it, and it keeps your fire lit.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful stuff. Well, thank you, brother. Appreciate that. And if you're looking for more encouragement about preaching and Christian living and things like that, you ought to check out preacherpollard.com, where Neal, Gary, Dale, Carl, and Brent all share thoughts. I love that this is a family effort these days. And what a wonderful thing that is. Preacherpollard.com. Go and check that out. Something new, every day of the week these days, right?
Pretty much. Yeah. Every once in a while, a son is so embroiled in local work, or not my brother. My brother was out for some time for physical reasons, but
Yeah,
it's up there pretty much every day. And
absolutely.
I appreciate them. It always shows their personality and their own perspective. They each have strengths and weaknesses in ministry. So it's
Mhm.
great to hear it.
You have been blogging for quite a while these days, right?
Yeah, I don't know how long. It started as an email back in the 90s,
Yeah,
became a blog, uh, getting close to 15 years ago. I don't know exactly when.
that's
Uh,
neat.
yeah, so
Pollard greens, right? And
that's
Preacher
what we kinda
Pollard and
called it
all of
because
that.
nobody knew how to
Yeah.
pronounce Pollard. It was like collard, so
That's good. Hey, listen, that's going to do it for this edition of Preachers in Training. Links to the web pages and things we've mentioned today will be in our show notes at thelightnetwork.tv. Look for season 15, episode 1. Thank you so much, brother, for your time today. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for being a part of our episode today. Until next time, let's go preach the word.